Yay, this meeting is being recorded. And by meeting, lecture. Right. Um, Couple disclaimers. This is not material I would usually lecture. Most of this is material that we would just have conversations about. I'm going to talk about what theater is. That's a weird thing to lecture on. Um, but this is the nature of the beast, especially given that I'm trying to limit synchronous class time. So we'll see what happens. Uh, this will probably be fairly long today. I have more material to cover than usual, I think. So please just pause, walk away, take breaks. Um, yeah, and all of these lectures are pretty low key. Remember, there's not an exam. This is just me giving extra context to the material that we're covering in class so that you're just extra prepared to do good work. We are in my house, so my house, tiny ass apartment. If you're lucky, you'll see a cat. I don't know where she is. I haven't seen her in a while. I think she's very confused about the rainy weather and the sudden fact that it's randomly autumn. Anyway, so I'm a lecture. It's going to be great. I'm also going to go over lots of Moodle Zoomy kind of things. But I'm going to start with the actual content. So you ready for a PowerPoint? I know I am. Okay. I'm assuming you can see this as always. Just going to trust the Zoom. Okay. Also, I'm in love with PowerPoint's new designs. This one's very 90s. I love it. It made me really happy. Okay, so this lecture is really very introductory, hence intro to play analysis. It's going to cover some basics, like I said, today, being Thursday, when we had class. A lot of this is stuff you already know, or that you sort of do instinctually without even realizing it. And I'm lecturing on it because I think it's important to just name the basics, and to really identify what makes reading a play special, what makes it different from all other types of reading that you might do, because you should not read a play the same way that you read an essay or a short story or an article for class, right? This is unique in a lot of ways. So we're going to talk about the differences and how those differences should impact the way you approach reading a play. And again, you know most of this stuff. And you'll hopefully disagree with my approaches to theater. This is mine. You can do whatever the hell you want with this information. So, part one, what is theater? This is probably a conversation if you've taken a theater class before, especially 100 level theater class, you've probably been asked this. And again, this is something that makes so much more sense if we're just chatting with each other, but I'm just going to lecture to you what theater is. So I'm going to give you a series of quotes, and these are different approaches to theater from famous theater practitioners. So Ariane Minuchkin says that it is a ceremony, a ritual. You should go out of the theater more human than you went in. I like this one because I'm increasingly playing with the idea of theater as sacred, partly because I'm exploring witchcraft for my thesis. So, witchcraft relies on ritual. Theater is ritualistic. If you know anything about the Greeks, we won't be covering them in this iteration of play analysis, but there are a lot of theories around the ritualistic roots of Western theater, given that the Greeks, right, given that worship and theater were intertwined, right, that theater was an attempt to communicate with the gods, right? It was a form of prayer. It was sacred then, and I would argue it's still sacred now in the sense that there is a lot of ritual around it, and I think you could tie in a lot of spirituality to theater. And you should go out more human than you went in. You'll hear humanity brought up a lot. The human experience, right? Seeing the human experience, empathizing with it, seeing what makes us different and the same on stage, right? This is by Jean Alter. Theater is a public event, a spectacle or a show, attempting to please or amaze the audience by display of exceptional stage achievements. It satisfies our natural desire to witness something extraordinary. And I think this is an important quote to include because, as I said in our first class, Aristotle and his Poetics, which I'll probably touch on at some point or another, Tatiana Godfrey might in her lecture, Aristotle, whom many theater practitioners still worship, lists spectacle really low on his list of what makes up theater and what makes up a play. And I think that's kind of a bummer. I mean, I don't think you should rank the elements of theater to begin with. But of course we see theater because it's magical, right? That element of suspension of disbelief, I would argue, makes theater distinct from, say, seeing a movie where the special effects require, at least now in the filmmaking, right, there's a believability that we expect. And so there's something kind of extra magical about being in a theater space and having to suspend that disbelief and just buy into whatever the hell we're seeing. That stage magic is really exciting. For those who weren't around for the last chunk of class on Tuesday, I talked about how SpongeBob the Musical, you can rent it on Amazon. Oh, you have to buy it, I think. I normally wouldn't tell you to spend money on Amazon, but SpongeBob the Musical, there's a recording of it, and I think it's one of the best examples of theatrical spectacle and a great example of why theater is unique. That kind of theater making, that kind of storytelling doesn't work in any other medium. So I don't think we should discount the value of spectacle. Not every play needs spectacle. Not every play needs a giant budget and flashy lights. On the other hand, you can make awesome spectacle on a really small budget. Anyway, worth naming, right? I think that's something that makes theater unique. Thornton Wilder of Our Town fame, for those who've read that. I regard theater as the greatest of all art forms. A little I don't know, again, about ranking art forms, but sure. The most immediate way in which a human being can share with another the sense of what it is to be a human being. The sense of immediacy feels important to me. Again, how many other spaces are you in where you are sharing an experience in real time with other people? It's part of why people are missing theater right now. Obviously, you can't experience it during a pandemic in socially distanced ways. And the fact that unlike a film, right, you can see a film surrounded by a group of people, but the film will be virtually the same every single time you see it. And theater, you can see one iteration of a play and it will be completely different the next night, right? So there's something kind of special in the immediacy of that unique experience with other people. Auguste Boal, one of my personal faves, theater is a form of knowledge. It should and can also be a means of transforming society. Theater can help us build our future rather than just waiting for it. Auguste Boal also uses the phrase, theater is a dress rehearsal for the revolution. So theater is an opportunity for us to test out how to be better humans. It should spur action. It should get people ready to go and do something. And the idea of knowledge is really important too. Knowledge is power, right? And so it's a chance to share that knowledge and make it something that everybody has ownership of. And this is the particularly important one that I will be holding on to. And I think it's really at the core of what I think theater is and what makes theater special, but you get to disagree with me. So Peter Brook says that I can take any empty space and make it a bare stage. A person, that's my little editorializing, walks across this empty space whilst someone else is watching, and this is all that is needed for an act of theater to be engaged. So the space doesn't need to be lit. It doesn't need to have a set. There doesn't need to be dialogue. It is an empty space with an audience and a person that they're watching. And for me, this is what I think makes theater theater. I think you need those three things, which I'll talk about again in a second. So theater can be made of a lot of stuff, right? This is a list of just some things that I, off this top of my head, thought, oh, right, theater involves a script, involves a play by extension, words, spoken words, I would add to that. Theater can be made of music. It can involve sound, blocking, so choreographed movement, a designated space, like a theater space, right, a stage, costumes, magic, spectacle. It can be made of an official artistic team in terms of director, designers, dramaturg, actors, right? You might have those hierarchical positions. Theater can be made of activism, as Augusta Boal says. I personally think everything is political, even if it's not explicitly so, but we could argue that point. Theater can be made of a point in that it has a specific message. Some theater is about nothing intentionally, but then I guess you could argue that the point of that show is nothing. Again, we could argue that. Theater can be made of something you want to teach, to educate people on. There can be set pieces, lighting. It can be entertaining or not. It can involve catharsis, which the Greeks loved and will probably return to at some point this semester. It can be made of ticket sales. We live in a capitalist society, so most theater does involve ticket sales. But according to Peter Brooks, and I would agree, I think theater must be made of three things. There needs to be a space, a shared space. There need to be bodies or a body in that space, and there has to be at least one person watching. I think that's what makes theater special. By extension, theater has to be live. I think even something like SpongeBob the Musical, which does translate, the filmed version does translate really well to TV. It's delightful. I would argue that's not theater anymore, right? That's a recording of theater, and therefore it's not theater, it's a recording. Anyway, I think those are the three things that you absolutely need. And people will argue this, and I think that's totally valid. Some people will disagree and argue that that recording of SpongeBob, or say if you watch the Hamilton recording, people will argue that that is literally theater. And that's valid. And people will argue whether there need to be live bodies, right? Is if I were to sit in a space and in real time watch a lamp get automatically turned on and off, or just hear music and not see any body. Some people would argue that that's theater. I would argue that's performance art. But again, disagree with me all you want. But I think it's important to distinguish, this is how I define theater, and it's up to you whether you define theater differently, right? So this is a chance for you to really hone that and to think about what actually theater means to you, yeah? Now we have to talk about what a play is. So what is a play? We have theater. Now what's a play? So not all theater is made of plays. Remember I had that list. Theater can involve a play. So why are we studying play analysis? If the majority of you are theater majors, or at least interested in theater, why play analysis specifically? Because there are other forms of theater, right? There's physical theater, which may not have a play. So those of you who saw The Water Station this last season, I would argue that that is a play. It's a wordless play, but still kind of falls in that gray area. Devised theater, which I'm making this fall if anyone wants to get involved in devised theater, doesn't start with a script. It doesn't start with a play at all. Ritual, I would argue that a lot of religious ritual is theater. I was raised Catholic. That's pretty damn theatrical. But again, those aren't plays. So why plays specifically? One, we are working from a Western framework. Oh, hey, a typo. Cool. We are working from a Western standpoint framework. And for better and worse, right? The nice thing about having that framework is it gives us boundaries, which means that we can go a little bit deeper. This isn't all theater, though. Western theater does not contain all theater, and it's worth naming that. I will bring in a little bit of non-Western theater in my lectures, but not a lot. And frankly, this is the kind of theater you'll most likely be making, just given the business, if you're going out into the quote unquote real world. You know, UMass occasionally branches out, which is really exciting. I think the fact that we did the Water Station says a lot. But you'll probably be working from a Western framework. I'll also say, frankly, that's my area of expertise. I was raised in the United States, and this is what I know best. And it's something that I need to work on as an educator and as an artist. For the time being, though, this is something that I can educate you on. So like I said, this is what you'll most likely be engaging with. And I would argue these skills are really transferable, right? I think your ability to analyze a play will transfer into the way that you approach other forms of theater and the ways that you'll approach other forms of analysis across the board, right? Hopefully you'll start watching television through a more critical lens after this class, right? Maybe, who knows? So we know what theater is made of, maybe you disagreed with me. what can a play be made of, right? What are the building blocks of a play? The stuff in bold, I would argue, is necessary, right? Text. We have to have words. And even something like the water station, which is wordless, there are still words on the page, right, that dictate what's happening. So there are words, they're just not spoken. So there may or may not be dialogue. There may or may not be stage directions, but there's text in some way. And that's obviously what we're going to be using in this class to do our analysis. There is character, and the character may or may not have a name, right? Sometimes it is a nameless character. But the fact that there's a body on stage means there is some kind of character, right? Character may or may not be human. Who knows? And there's some kind of story in the sense that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. We'll talk more about this when we get to plot beats, but you can have a nonlinear play and still have a beginning, middle, and end in the sense that an audience comes in, sees a thing, and eventually it ends. And therefore, there is inevitably a beginning, middle, and end, just in terms of how time functions. The fiction of the play might mess with time, but the audience's sense of time means that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, yeah? And the story may or may not include exposition and rising action and climax and falling action and all that kind of stuff that you've probably heard about in other classes. May not. There's probably a setting, a fictional setting of some sort. There's probably themes. Again, maybe it's about nothing, but I'd still argue that that's a theme in a way. And then there's genre, style, and convention. And I'm going to talk about these because I think it's important just to know what the heck we're saying when we use these words. We throw these words around a lot, and it's worth just naming them, defining them a little bit more clearly. So genre, we hear this word a lot. We talk about genre in a lot of ways, right? So genre is a category, right? It's a method of categorization, and it categorizes a text subject matter and or how it is presented. And this is important for you all as you read plays. Genre can give us clues. It can give us clues about a text that hint at its structure, themes, and overall feel of the world of the play. So you might know the genre going in. Remember in the New Play Exchange, you can like look for specific genres. You can like say, I want a historical play, right? And you can click on that. And that'll give you, if the playwright has already designated a historical play, that's going to give you tons of clues about what you're getting yourself into. And this works in reverse too. I think it's really valuable to actually try and categorize a play as you're reading it, because then you can think about what the author, what rules, right? What rules the author is following and breaking. And that's really valuable. So it's worth noting, right, that I think contemporary playwrights and storytellers of all kinds are increasingly either blending genres or ignoring them altogether, but it's still worth naming. Sometimes, I would argue. Again, disagree with me if you want. So examples of play genres include science fiction, musicals, there's tragedy and comedy, and increasingly tragicomedy. It's pretty rare to see something that's just tragedy or just comedy nowadays. Historical plays. I'll note that in terms of sci-fi, Josh Glenn Caden, who's a third-year directing MFA student, is going to do a guest lecture later in the semester and is doing his thesis on sci-fi theater. So if you're interested in that, keep your ears peeled for opportunities to learn about that this semester. Then we have style. And style is a little bit more nebulous, a little bit harder to define, but it basically speaks to the manner in which a play is written, performed, designed, directed. And again, provides clues. It provides clues about the world of the play through production and aesthetic choices that are embedded in the text. And style, typically these days you'll see contemporary playwrights drawing from different styles. It's pretty rare to see a playwright or to read a play written in the last few decades that is exclusively of one style. Usually they draw from multiple, right? And they're influenced by multiple styles, but it's really valuable for you to try and name those styles, because then, again, you can think about what rules are they breaking and what rules are they following, right? So some examples are naturalism, realism, absurdism, expressionism, a lot of isms, yeah? And I will be lecturing on a lot of these different styles of theater. And again, even so, we're reading, for example, Sweat by Lynn Nottage is an example of realism. And even though that play wasn't written that long ago, I would argue it isn't strictly realism. I would argue that there's some magic involved. It's not entirely linear. Yeah, so it's pretty rare to find something that's exclusively one thing, but naming the fact that Sweat is within the world of realism as a style is really, really helpful. That will inform the designers and the costume designers. I don't know why costume is different from other designers. It will inform the designers. It will inform your dramaturgy. I think you need a different kind of dramaturgy for a play that is more in the world of realism than not. And it gives the director the freedom to say, okay, the text, the play itself is a form of realism. How realistic do I want to be, though? What rules do I want to bend? Yeah. And finally, we have a convention. And this is going to be especially important as you think about the world of the play for next week. But convention is essentially an agreement. It's an agreement between the audience and the performers, in which the audience accepts whatever is happening in the theater space as believable. And this requires that awesome idea of suspension of disbelief. And convention can be in the text itself, or it can be the result of production choices. And convention often works as a signal of change or transition, and it offers clarity to set up the rules of the world, right? If we acknowledge the fact that all theater is fiction, even if it's a docudrama or based on a historical event, it is fictional, right? In the sense that literally actors are playing parts. Then we have rules to that world, right? In terms of how time works, in terms of how quickly people move through space, how close space is connected to each other, in terms of hierarchies and power. All of those rules are specific to the world of the play, even if the play itself is hyper realistic. It is not our world, right? The world I'm sitting in, my apartment. If I were to make a play about my apartment, inevitably it will be different and have different rules. It just has to, yeah? So it's really exciting to think about those conventions and both how they're present in the text and how you as an artist might follow those conventions on stage or create those of your own. So that one gets a little bit wooier and weirder, but it's a useful term and something that I'll be using and I encourage you to use. So now, how do we read a play? And you've all read plays before. You probably already do this already, but I want to just name it. So I'm going to just name some tips and tricks. Again, reading a play is different than reading anything else. And I would argue that, I wouldn't even argue this. Reading a play is hard. And I think because we read plays less frequently and because I would argue here, they require a different kind of active imagination than other types of reading. The fact that, you have to imagine that the play is meant for theater. And so you have to be particularly imaginative. I find reading plays to be extra draining. It takes me, even though plays technically are less wordy than, say, reading a short story, right? There's a lot more empty space on the page. It still takes me a lot longer to read a play than it would anything else. And it's a muscle that I build and I lose. So I worked at a theater company before I came to graduate school that ran a new play festival, and I would read in any given month upward of 100 plays. That was literally my job for a while. And it's when I was at the peak, I could read a play. I don't know what my record was, but I could read many plays in a single sitting. And then the summer hits and I lose that stamina. It's something that you can build up and it's something you can lose. So I'll say from experience, now that I'm getting back into a semester, reading plays takes me forever again. So don't feel like you're not doing it well just because a play takes you longer to read. It really should. So I would recommend remembering as you're reading these plays, right? A play is theater. You have to remember that. It is an act of theater. It is, and you can think there are all these different awesome metaphors for how a play should be read, right? You can think of it as a map, a blueprint, a canvas, a set of instructions, but a play is only one part of a larger piece of theater, and it's really important to remember that. This is a pro tip. This is all me. You can thank me in the future when you do this. I came up with this when I was doing those many, many weeks of intensive play reading. One of my weakest points is I lose track of characters, especially if there are a lot of characters in a play. I take a screen capture of the character breakdown page. And then I just keep it with me. So when I'm reading a play, I have that next to me the entire time. Sometimes I'll even do it on my phone. So I have different screens. And I have it there to refer to so I don't have to scroll all the way back up. You're welcome. I'm very proud of myself for that. It's a very simple thing and it's great. Also, remember that you have to read the stage directions, as the stage directions are part of the play. They're part of the story. I'm often tempted to skip the stage directions if they're super wordy. And I'm not a scenic designer. It's harder for me to visualize a lot of the specifics sometimes in stage directions, but it's so important. It's part of the vocabulary and world building, so do not skip them. And you absolutely have to read a play twice, especially for this class. You have to read it once. I would recommend using the active reading strategies that I'm going to talk about. And then you have to read it again to actually get deeper and analyze it. I bet you're going to read some of these plays specifically for this class more than 3 or 4 times. Eventually you're skimming, you're maybe not reading deeply, but you absolutely have to read these plays more than once. Remember, intermissions are there for a reason. If there's an intermission, take it. Take a break. If there's an act break, go pee. Go get some coffee. Go check your phone. Go stretch your legs, right? Do whatever you would normally do during an intermission. They're there for a reason. And also just take breaks whenever you need them. Maybe you need them between every scene. Whatever you need, please take them. So those are some tips and tricks that I think, these are things that I do when I'm reading a play that I don't when I'm reading anything else. Other than taking breaks, I definitely do that. I do want to talk about active reading, and I am never going to collect this, right? I'm never going to ask you to turn in this kind of work, but I do expect you to come to class having actively read these plays, whatever that means to you. And I'm going to share an active reading strategy that I find to be really effective. I actually use it myself. This is something that I've adapted from what an undergraduate professor taught me. And again, you may or may not follow this directly, but it's a way for me when I'm reading a when I'm reading a play for the very first time, I use this strategy because it just keeps me engaged. I also really recommend, another reason that I recommend printing out a play rather than doing it from your screen is, okay, so I used to teach, I tutored ACT and SAT students, awful, super problematic, gross. But something we taught in there that I do take with me is if you're keeping your pencil moving, underlining and writing as you go, it's in your bones, and that really does make a difference, right? You're going to recall things better. So it's important. Also, it gives you a chance to stop looking at screens for a while, and I'm already getting headaches this semester, far more than I used to. So I recommend printing things whenever you can. Nope. Okay. Active reading, so AKA paying attention and reading to remember it, right? Again, making it a physical process is important. This is my approach. And I will write this in my script, or I'll have a notebook with me if it's not printed out, and just keep a list going. So I keep a list of, or annotate 3 things. I write down everything I like, or underline things that I like. And this can be anything from, oh, I love this character, I love this line, even a word or a beat, a phrase. What do you like about this play? What gets you excited? It can be, you might not like the play as a whole, but I guarantee you there are things that you like within it. And that's just a way to keep you excited and engaged, right? Really important one is questions, which we've already covered. And these can cover the gamut, right? Big questions, small questions. Sometimes I'll write down a question and then it's answered on the next page or even the next line. But again, it's still a way of keeping me engaged. And this is really important. So my professor, when I was an undergrad, used to also have us write down dislikes. And I've eliminated that. And instead, whenever I dislike something, I frame it as a question. And I do this for a few reasons. One, dislikes are just kind of negative. You are welcome to dislike things in this class. I don't expect you to love every play and every part of every play. But that does, I find that when I'm reading from that mindset, it's not a positive way to engage, right? And also, I think more importantly, oftentimes dislikes are actually biases in disguise. For example, Susan Laurie Parks writes a lot of, right, we talk about, I'll talk about this later, but you probably noticed from Project Tempest, uses slang, uses vernacular, even she purposefully misspells things and uses punctuation in unconventional ways. And at first glance, I've had a lot of students who don't like that, and that's totally fine. You're allowed to not like it. But the question is both, why don't I like it? And more importantly, why is the playwright doing that? And And oftentimes, again, it's a bias, not always. Um, but it's not uncommon, and I still do this even, that my limited white cisgendered perspective is clouding reading a play in a more open-minded way, right? Maybe this is just not my lived experience, and my dislike is actually just discomfort, right? Oftentimes discomfort is just you getting over a bias. So I recommend phrasing your dislikes as questions. And sometimes there will be a thing that's just a dislike, and that's fine. Maybe you just don't like the color blue and this play has a lot of blue in it. But again, it's worth writing down, why is there so much blue in this play? As opposed to, I'm so tired of the color blue. Or even, this play is so long and so wordy and so I'm tired, or I don't like this character. Why? And is it intentional that the playwright made this character dislikable or unlikable, right? You still might not like it at the end of the day, but it's better framed as a question. And finally, I recommend writing down connections. And these can be anything. What does this play remind you of? It can be a connection to a historical event. It can be a connection to your own personal experiences. This character reminds me of my grandmother. It can remind you of texts that you've read in other classes, characters that you like, TV shows. And this is really helpful when you're pulling together your materials for production, right? Those connections can be really, really inspiring and crack open the play in exciting ways. So another big thing to note is that everything is intentional. Every single punctuation point mark, every line break, everything, every semicolon and stage direction. And that's really, really important. Sometimes it's tempting to just cross out something, but the playwright put it there for a reason, I 100% guarantee. And it's your job as a theater artist to make sense of that for yourself. So this means that if you're really confused and frustrated, especially if you're reading like a nonlinear play or a play that's really long and wordy, when you hit that point where you want to just throw a play against the wall, your job is to ask why, right? Again, this goes back to dislikes, but I'm going to punch, it's just really important. I'm punching it a lot, right? Why is the play the way it is? And how does it function? What does that tell me about a piece of theater, right? I'm trying to think of an example of a type of, I've worked on plays that I hate personally, but my job in the room is not to hate it. My job in the room is to accept the play for what it is, and then never work on it again, never shove it in a drawer. But you will find value. I think there's something of value to be found in even the most frustrating and even offensive of plays, right? There's something for you to get out of it, and your job is to just figure it out. And that's what this class is about. I hope you like all the plays. I selected the plays this semester because I personally love them, and I want to see what you all think. You're welcome to personally not love them, but I do want you to try and figure them out. Also, what's dramaturgy? I keep saying we're thinking like dramaturgs. You're going to hear dramaturgs just say that depends. My definition of dramaturgy is that it's composed of three things. I think every dramaturg has to be curious. The dramaturg has to be asking questions, even when everyone else is in tech and this play is set in stone. My job is to ask the annoying questions, just keep going, to keep people on their toes. Responsibility, right? Are we doing this play in an ethical way, and how can we do so better? And finally, advocacy. I think that I find that I'm an advocate for the playwright who may or may not be in the room. I'm an advocate for the audience when the audience isn't in the room yet. And in reverse, I'm an advocate for the director and playwright when they aren't a part of the process anymore. So I encourage you to read like dramaturgs. That's all. Again, ask any dramaturg, they'll give you a different answer, but that's my definition of dramaturgy. So finally, again, if you haven't taken a break yet, you probably should. I'm sorry this is so long. There's so much to cover in this first lecture. I want to talk about Susan Laurie Parks because you are reading 365 Days, 365 Plays. We're going to read another play of Susan Laurie Parks's later in the semester. We're going to be reading In the Blood, which is a super cool play. So I want to talk about her. Here's a cool quote by Susan Laurie Parks. She says that since history is a recorded or remembered event, theater for me is the perfect place to, quote, make history. That is because so much of African American history has been unrecorded, disremembered, washed out. One of my tasks, the playwright, is to, through literature and the special strange relationship between the theater and real life, locate the ancestral burial ground, dig for bones, find bones, hear the bones sing, write it down. There's so much to unpack in this quote that I'm not going to. I'll let you unpack it. But in all of Susan Lori Parks's plays, including every single one of the plays in this giant compendium of tiny plays, is history, particularly American history and particularly African American history. But history is everywhere in these texts, and I love the way that for Susan Lori Parks, it's not just writing about history; it is creating history and filling in gaps in history. There's this magic in how she writes and in how, by imagining something happening, it is now real, right? Imagining history makes it real. Toni Morrison talks about this as well in her writing about the African American experience. She writes, for example, about I wish I had the quote, but if you haven't read Beloved, you should. But Toni Morrison talks about, I believe it is Beloved, in that so many slave narratives have been erased to history and lost to history, but in creating these fictional characters, there's a taste of it, right? Her ancestors get a voice, and her characters become real and become voices for those lost histories. Anyway, that's magic. I think that's magic. I think that's witchcraft. It's wicked. It's super cool. So a bit about Susan Lori Parks. Susan Lori Parks, I'm going to keep calling her by her full name apparently. Parks was raised in a military family, and she spent a lot of her schooling in Germany. So she went to middle and high school in West Germany. She actually went to a German high school. And the experience showed her, quote, what it feels like to be neither white nor black, but simply foreign. So there was this interesting distancing effect that she went through. And when she came back to the United States, because it's interesting, I think, that her plays are so embedded in and about the African-American experience, right? And she actually earned her degree right here in Mount Holyoke College, right around the corner from where some of you are living. So she studied both English and German literature, and she studied under James Baldwin, who said that she is an utterly astounding and beautiful creature who may become one of the most valuable artists of our time, which is pretty high praise from someone like James Baldwin. And she's known for, as I said before, using African-American vernacular English and, quote, Black English in her plays. And this is important. It's validating, right? It's validate. I think it's beautiful to have a playwright actually write that down, a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, no less, to say, this is a valid way of speaking, right? And also, I mean, it gives an authenticity to her texts. But it's also really exciting to see in her plays how the word okay and the letter K, those have different meanings. And she's super intentional about that in her texts. They have different connotations emotionally and culturally. And so the way that she spells yours, Y-R, that's intentional. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And Parks is inspired by the jazz aesthetic, and you'll see this throughout her plays. So I encourage you to think of them as not just works of theater, but works of music. And the jazz aesthetic encourages a break from the confines of what we've been trained and told to create. So jazz breaks rules, that's the point. And this impacts her narratives. So you may have heard of rep and rev, repeat and revise. Susan Lori Parks's plays tend to repeat themselves. You hear the same beats over and over, but they're slightly different. In the same way that jazz, you'll notice jazz does that, right? Jazz repeats the same riffs over and over, but every time it's slightly different. So her plays are pretty much always nonlinear in that way. And her tone is just very musical. So I encourage you to think of it as in that heightened, magical, musical way. So here, some of her plays are here. Top Dog, Underdog is probably what she's best known for. We will be reading In the Blood, which is a great play. And I want to just show you this. This is from the introduction to 365 Plays, 365 Days. And it's actually from her Elements of Style. And this is great. I recommend referring to this as you read her plays, her brief plays. So you're going to see things like rest. this means, so she said, oh, excuse me, I'll actually read her words. Susan Leary Park says, I'm continuing the use of my slightly unconventional theatrical elements. Here's a roadmap. So you might see these rests, which means take a little time, pause, a breather, make a transition. A spell is an elongated and heightened rest. It's denoted by the repetition of figures' names with no dialogue, and it has an architectural look, right? So if you see multiple characters' names in a row, that's a spell. And this is a place where the figures experience their pure, true, simple state. While no action or stage business is necessary, directors should fill this moment as they best see fit. And you can imagine what you best see fit as someone reading the play. Parentheses around dialogue indicate softly spoken passages, asides, sotto voce. And then sometimes plays for two characters use no character names, so you should be alternating lines. Other plays for two or more characters use no character names, but each new speech is preceded by a dash. Each dash indicates when a new character begins, and she gives an example below. So you can use this as you read the plays. I know that was so much information. I think this is the end of my lecture, officially. Not the end of my lecture period. But I am gonna stop sharing for a second. Again, if you haven't taken a break, please, for the love of all that is holy, take a break. Because I'm also gonna go through some Moodle-y stuff and talk about your assignment in more detail. So I'm gonna need to screen share again, but first I need to tell PowerPoint to go away. And I will put this on Moodle. This PowerPoint is available for you to refer to whenever you want. You can download it, you can save it, or never refer to it again if you thought it was all bullshit. Got pretty, I don't know, I can get pretty existential sometimes in my lectures. Okay, let's go to Moodle, which means I have to share again. And I just want to show you a couple of nifty things that I've added to Moodle. Okay, let's read some plays. Okay, so up here we have the syllabus. The 2.0 version is there if you want the most updated version. Announcements, Zoom, new play exchange. I'm gonna open peer feedback. And I hope this is useful. I have a section where I've broken down all of the free passes, right? So I have, if you'll recall, you have free passes when it comes to turning in work late, discussions, and attendance, and providing peer feedback. So I have a bit more of a breakdown here separate from the syllabus, which I think, I don't know, maybe it's useful, maybe it's not. So under interviewing a play, our first week, if you haven't done the survey yet, please do. The hard deadline is Friday, August 28th by 11:59 p.m. But if you don't make that, turn it in anyway. I want to get to know you and your learning style. This is the turn it in for the first analysis. It's due next Friday, 11:59 p.m. But if you'll recall, I'm asking you to turn in your assignments in two places, in the forum and in the submission spot. So that's what I mean by that. So I want you to turn it in here. If it loads, maybe it won't. So I want you to turn it in here. This is a pretty standard submission area for Moodle. Probably used it before. And then I also want you to turn it in the peer feedback session. Again, a little clunky, but this is the place where I'm asking you to comment on each other's work. And I'll talk about peer feedback more later because we're not doing that for a while yet. You haven't even done the assignment yet. Boop, boop, boop. So I have here a PDF of your first assignment with more information on it. I'll get to that in a second. For next week, note that I'm requiring that you read Visit to a Small Planet. It's so good. It's a pretty brief essay, really, really good. And then of course, I want you to choose a play from this ebook. Boop, 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 boop. I don't want to download this again. Let me just find the assignment sheet. Oh my goodness, what class is this? Great. Sorry, you have to look at my hideous file keeping system. Okay, so this is your first assignment. And this is overkill because we did this in class today, but I'm going to do it for posterity. Ugh. So for this assignment, I'm asking that you ask and answer a series of questions about one of the 365 plays of your choosing. Ugh. So I want you to include the following. Here are the parameters. I want you to name what the play is so I can find it. So the plays are named and numbered. Please include that information. Otherwise I will be like, what are you talking about? I want you to list 12 interview questions. You can use the ones we generated in class. I have copied and pasted that list here. You can come up with your own. Totally up to you. It can be a hybrid of both. Probably will be a hybrid of both. I want 6 of these questions to be more detail-oriented. And at first glance, they might seem like they're just going to garner a sentence-long answer, but hopefully they won't. And then 6 of them should be more big picture. And I want you to actually answer 5 of them. So list 12, answer 5, at least. If you want to answer more, I'm not going to penalize you from that, I guess. I want 100 to 300 words per answer, so not very long. And some of them should be detail-oriented questions. I want and I'm asking you that you do that because the detail-oriented questions seem like you could answer them in a word or sentence, but I want you to use them as an opportunity to dig more deeply. See if answering that question reveals anything, right? So that question about like, what is the tempest? What is a tempest? That's a very simple question. You could just throw in the definition of a tempest, but actually digging deeper makes you realize, okay, a tempest is there's violence implied with a tempest, and a tempest has allusions to Shakespeare, right? So go deep. And then finally, I want you to, in about 300 words, just give me a summary of what you learned. Reflect. And here, I have some prompts here, but you can go off book, right? So you might want to think whether this is a valuable analytical technique. What would you do differently next time if you were to do this assignment on a different play? What challenges and triumphs did you encounter? It's always a great reflective tool. How did it inform your understanding of the play and or potential production choices? Please submit this as a Word document or PDF. And remember, you're submitting it in 2 places. And just some reminders, remember, you are an artist. You can think of it as from your perspective, or you can think of it from the perspective of an audience member as a director. Remember, it's a play. It is a work of theater. It is meant for the stage. Do not approach this as you would a work of literature. And remember, if you're reading and a word or phrase just stands out to you as meaningful, that's awesome. That is your intuition speaking. That is your artistic gut. That's magic. That's some witchcraft right there. Sorry, everything's gonna be a witchcraft this semester just because that's my thesis. But follow that. That's your intuition. Circle it, Google it, go down that rabbit hole, right? If the word tempest is exciting to you, that's exciting for a reason. Remember, everything is intentional. I talked about this already, but everything, her plays are full of wordplay and puns and symbolism and allegory. Just have fun with it. No 2 analyses of the same play will be alike, especially with the work of Susan Laurie Parks. So have fun. This is worth 50 points. I'm just going to say it. I go back and forth on whether I should actually say this, but I'm not a strict grader, especially for this class, because this class is, I had a wonderful professor say this to me just a couple of days ago in a graduate level class I'm taking. This is your journey. It is not my journey. And I will grade accordingly. I want to see that you're trying things that might be uncomfortable to you. I want to see that you're having fun. So it's 50 points. I want you to do all of the things in the bullet point thing. So if you're missing a component, that I'll take off points for, but I'm not grading for grammar. I'm not grading for how profound you go or vocabulary. I want you to find your own voice and use it. I'll be looking for that. So this is due via Moodle by 11:59 p.m. on Friday, September 4th. Ta-da. And again, look at all these beautiful questions you all came up with. Isn't that a cool pedagogical technique that I used? I'm so smart. Okay. I actually want to show you one other thing, and this is the end of the lecture. The lecture is effectively over. But I did want to, darn it, let me find this. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second because I have to find it in my email. This is not about theater, but I feel like it's important to share with you. So just give me a second. Boop, 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 boop. I hope everyone had a good first week of Zoom school and that you're staying safe and wearing masks and socially distancing. You better be doing that. I had a surprisingly good week. I didn't think I would enjoy school as much as I've been virtually. It's kind of cool. Okay, 1 second. I had this downloaded, I swear. And reminder, if you watch this on time, to come to our awesome season's kickoff. Okay, here we go. This is going to get a little off topic. So when you start hearing me ramble, you can stop the video at this point. But I'd like it if you watched. So I'm going to talk about something called work to rule. I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent, and this is a bit tangentially related to theater, but also it's actually really relevant. And work to rule is a union technique that the Graduate Student Union is employing, and I want to bring this to your attention for a number of reasons. Work to rule means that we are protesting the exploitation of UMass instructors. I'm a UMass instructor and I'm being exploited. Everyone's being exploited right now. All workers are, I mean, not to go on a super leftist rant, but all workers under capitalism are inevitably exploited, right? But right now, especially in this pandemic environment, and particularly UMass is exploiting people. You probably got that email, that horrible announcement that tons of dining hall workers are being furloughed. UMass is not even being subtle about it anymore, right? They're exploiting the most vulnerable workers, and frankly, graduate students are pretty vulnerable. They pay us very little. Graduate student stipends are not great, and we're generally overworked and underpaid. So we have a union, luckily. So I'm going to talk about what work to rule means, and I hope that you listen. So our amazing union made this, so I'm just going to read this out loud. So who are your instructors at UMass and why? So your instructors are often, very often, graduate students in pursuit of an advanced degree, such as an MA, MS, PhD, or in my case, an MFA. So in exchange for a small stipend, it's usually around $20,000 a year, and we do not get summer pay. Your instructor is contracted to work at UMass. For the record, $20,000 a year is not a lot. And frankly, the Amherst area is way overpriced when it comes to rental prices. It's weird. So the reason is UMass does not want to have to employ full-time educators. They do this intentionally. They don't want to pay living wages, full stop. And so they exploit the graduate students because we're here for an education, we need it, they know that we need them, and so they pay us a pittance and don't hire full-time instructors. And the academic job market is worsening. This means that many of your instructors will continue to teach even after they get their MFAs and PhDs as adjuncts. Adjuncts get a pretty comparable amount of money. Adjuncts do not make a lot of money. Oftentimes, PhDs and MFA graduates are unable to find well-paid jobs because of the devaluation of instructor work by higher education institutions. So increasingly, you will see universities not hiring folks for full-time jobs, even to teach. And again, they don't want to pay us living wages. That is why. So teaching classes, I, for example, am contracted to work 20 hours a week, and most of your graduate instructors are to do so as well. This 20 hours a week is usually impossible. We usually overwork in order to deliver the best education to you, and we do so willingly. I personally love teaching. It is increasingly becoming my vocation instead of my job. I love it. I willingly overwork, but it's still overwork, yeah? So for example, examples include working late into the night grading your work to provide other feedback. We're also expected to do prep work before our contract starts. So this includes preparing the syllabus and the course's online presence. We don't get paid over the summer, but we still have to have a syllabus ready for the first day of class, right? And it's worth noting that with the COVID-19 pandemic and the move to online teaching, we've been spending an additional amount of time doing training to learn new equipment and teaching methodologies. And I will note the university did offer training over the summer, but did not offer to pay anybody to train. So I personally, just out of pride, did not. I'm learning this as I go. Yeah, they did not pay folks who are working over the summer at other jobs. So this brings us to work to rule. It's a labor action. It comes down to only performing the work in our contracts with the university, only working within those contracted hours. So this semester, that's one of the reasons that I'm limiting my office hours to just Tuesdays, and I'm not doing by appointments. I'm trying to keep myself within these 20-hour-a-week contracted hours. And our contract started on Monday. I taught class on Tuesday. I cheated. I started working on my contract the day before classes started, actually 2 days before. And I'm somewhat frustrated with myself for that. It was really hard for me. I procrastinated as long as I could, but I just love teaching and it brings me joy, and I did it, and I'm a bit of a union traitor for that. But I will say that my syllabus and class prep was not as far along as it usually would be. So why work to rule? This is to avoid overwork so that I can have time to actually take classes and do research. But also this is a message to the UMass administration about the value of instructor work. UMass works because we work. That is our union slogan. Graduate instructors teach the majority of undergraduate courses, and we're just not adequately compensated for that labor. So a lot of union workers, and hopefully you'll hear this from some of your other instructors as well, we're committing to work to rule this semester. So if I do not get your work to you in the time that I originally said, it might be because I'm going over my hours, and that is a message to the university, right? That is a message, and it is important. And we're hoping that this message spreads this semester. We're committing to it as hard as we can. And this is important for you, right? UMass is expecting that you pay full price to attend Zoom Mass, while they are meanwhile cutting staff and demanding work from fewer workers. They want you to bear that financial burden of their budget cuts and spending freezes in the form of massive amounts of student debt. The chancellor, it's worth noting, and other administrators continue to take home six-figure salaries. I am making under 30 grand a year. It's near impossible to survive on that. I will, for the record. And many of your adjuncts and other instructors are suffering that as well. As the semester progresses, the administration will no doubt try to pit us against each other, you, the students, and me, the graduate students, so that they don't have to take any responsibility for the profiteering. So we should all be outraged. And this is a tactic that institutions under capitalism use all the time. They try to convince different vulnerable communities that our struggles are not the same. They try to convince us that we should be against each other, that we're causing each other's struggles, but actually the root of the problem is the institution itself and capitalism itself. And that's really important. So there may be times this semester when I or other instructors are falling behind, and you have every right to complain and be frustrated with that. The university will probably try to blame us. They will try to put the blame on us, even though we are just trying to work within our contracts. So be prepared for that. And if you want to spread the word, please, please do. I don't know how this is going to affect me yet. Quite frankly, play analysis doesn't require as much prep work as some of the other classes I've taught before. So I'm not super concerned about it. And again, I freaking love teaching. It's my pride and joy. And so I will probably overwork, and I'm okay with it. But it's worth naming that. I'm still trying to figure out what work to rule. It's so hard for me to say what it means to me as an action. But I also wanted to talk about it because I'm going to get a little soapboxy here. So I was an undergraduate about a decade ago now. So I'm 29. So I was starting school about 10 years ago. And I've been reflecting on that a lot. And I've realized that if I could give one message to myself as an incoming student, and this is the message I would give to all of you, both as students and folks either already working in workforces or about to enter workforces, the one piece of advice would be that institutions are not people, and you do not owe institutions anything. Even theater companies that claim to be egalitarian and non-hierarchical, they're still working within a capitalist system, and that means they are exploiting you. You are exploited, and you always deserve better. I deserve better as a graduate student. You deserve better as undergraduates from an administration that is reaping the benefits of our labor. And you will deserve better as theater artists. You will deserve better as workers in any capacity. You should always demand more, and you should not feel guilty for that. And institutions will try to make you feel guilty, and you deserve it. I deserve better. And again, you deserve better. So the work to rule is not just about me being angry about being exploited. It's part of a bigger problem. And it's also part of standing in solidarity to the dining hall workers who are getting furloughed. And I'm sure a lot of you have relatives and loved ones who are getting furloughed in their capacities as well. So anything we can do to send one message means we're sending a message to the wider world. So that is Work to Rule. If you have any questions or want to learn more, contact me. Yeah, sorry I got a little political there, but theater is political and the personal is political, and it's just what the world is right now. I promise future lectures are not going to be this long. Pinky swear, 100%, it's not going to be like this. But I had a lot of soapboxes this first week. Hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow at the season kickoff. Otherwise, I will see you either at office hours or in Thursday's class or the week after. Bye.